Morning again. It's the 27th of April and almost this last week of April, in fact. And I'm wanting you to look at your green reading book. Looks like that. And I want you to turn to page 159. And I'm going to read part of a story, and then I'm going to go ahead and let you finish the story. And after you finish the story, you can go ahead and take the little online quiz. It's a longer story, so I'm going to read for a few minutes. It's a true story. It tells us that right at the first, and the name of it is Annie Sullivan. Tewksbury. We're on page 159. What is this place, and where are we? 10-year-old Annie Sullivan clutched her brother Jimmy's arm. She rubbed her red, puffy eyes, trying to see better. Her eyes were swollen, not because she'd been crying, but because of a sickness that had left her almost blind. "This is Tewksbury," answered the man. "You and your little brother will be living here for a while." All right. Just looking at the story so far, because it's always a good idea to assess as we're going along. We know that Annie Sullivan, it says she was 10 years old. And looking at the size of the two, it looked like Jimmy was her little brother. And it sounds like there was a bad situation where she was sick enough that they thought that she was going to lose her sight. And it does say your little brother will be living here. And I don't know where here is, but my first feelings, maybe it was with you too, my first feelings is that perhaps these people are orphans. I don't know. We'll read the story and continue. In the late 1800s, Tewksbury was the place where poor people were sometimes sent. Many of the people there were old or sick. Annie and Jimmy were both very sick children with no mother, no father to care for them. All right, now I found out. Okay, so they're orphans, and they're poor orphans. And so the people in this institute where they take care of you, these people are either old or they're sick. While they were at Tewksbury, Jimmy became weaker and weaker. He died only a few months after they arrived. "Now I don't have anyone to love," Annie sighed to herself. Wouldn't that be an awful thing? To have no one to love and no one really to love you. That would be such a sad thing. Sad place to live in this life. Whether you're old or whether you're young, you want to be loved by somebody. And these little people didn't have anybody at all. As the days went by, the old woman became Annie's best friend. The women became Annie's only friends. Annie loved to listen to the stories they told her, and she loved to look at the pictures in their books, but it wasn't long before Annie made a wonderful discovery. She found a pretty girl about her age who could read. Annie listened as her friend read to her. The girl stumbled over long words and sometimes skipped 2 or 3 pages at a time. "When I learn to read, I'm going to read well," Annie thought to herself. Annie told her wishes to a lady in charge of Tewksbury. "Oh, Miss Maggie," she sighed, "if only I could see better, I'd go to school and learn to read." Maggie thought for a moment. "I've heard of a school where they teach blind people to read." "Oh, okay." So Annie's eyesight, even though she wasn't blind, was she blind? Let's go back and look and see. Her eyes were swollen that left her almost blind. Okay, so she was blind enough that she couldn't see enough to read. And she had determined that she wasn't going to be like this little girl who was reading kind of sloppily. She was going to read really well if she ever learned how to read. "You have really?" Now remember the girl said there is a blind school, okay? "You have really?" Annie asked. "They could teach me, couldn't they?" "Yes, they could teach you, but it costs money to go there and you don't have any." Maggie said sadly, "You may as well face it, Annie Sullivan. You're going to be here at Tewksbury for the rest of your life." "Oh, no, I won't," Annie answered. "Somehow I'm going to that school and learn to read." So she was a determined girl, even from the very first. But I also thought about Maggie. Evidently, she was one of the workers there. And I thought, she could have been more encouraging. She just said, well, you're going to be here all your life, might as well face it. And I thought, well, that's not kind of a nice friend to have. I love it when friends can be encouraging to one another. Don't you love that too? It's so nice when, you can think of some sweet thing to say, or, I've heard many of you say really nice things in the classroom. I've heard, Cruz make a nice compliment to someone, or Lillian, can say something that's positive and it's not something that's going to drag somebody down. Or Sophie in her quietness, can just have a smile on her face and just be encouraging. And that's the kind of friend that I'd want to be. And that's the kind of friend that everyone wants to have. Our next chapter is called Perkins. The thought of school never left Annie's mind. She dreamed of the day she could go there. Then one day some men came to inspect Tewksbury. "This is your chance, Annie," whispered a friend. "One of those men knows about the school for the blind. I think it's called Perkins. Mention it to Mr. Sanborn." Now that's the kind of friend to have. I don't know it doesn't say who the friend was, but at least the friend said, "This is your chance. Come on, these people know about this blind school. And if you say something to them now, maybe you'd have a chance." Annie wanted to learn to read so badly that she ran right up to the men just as they were about to leave. "Mr. Sanborn," she cried, "I want to learn to read. Please let me go to Perkins." Annie was sent back to her room without an answer. But she didn't give up. Several weeks went by. Then one day she heard her friend Maggie call to her. Annie, I have wonderful news. This letter says that you can go to Perkins School for the Blind, and you won't have to pay anything." Annie grabbed Maggie and hugged her. "I'm going to school. I'm going to learn to read." The months passed slowly. Finally, September came, and Annie went to Perkins. Though she was almost 15 years old, she felt as excited as a 6-year-old about to start the first grade. And when Annie got to Perkins, the teachers did put her in first grade. And there's a cute picture there on page 165 where Annie is sitting. Of course, she's bigger than all the other kiddos. But the other kiddos don't really know that because this is a school for the blind. And when you're blind, you don't really know how old people are, or you don't really know some things. So Annie didn't feel out of place at all. And she didn't care anyway because she was interested in learning how to read. She was wanting to know, how am I going to read? And there she was in first grade. So so far the story has a real nice turn to it, where she started out, they're so poor, and she lost her brother. That is a sad story. And of course we know he went home to be with Jesus. But still it was sad to lose the only person that she really did love, or that loved her. And so it's kind of a nice turn. She wanted to learn how to read, and now she's going to learn how to read, and that's pretty cool. The first graders at the blind school, I'm on page 166. The first graders at the blind school couldn't see Annie, but they knew she was much older than they were. Big Annie, they teased. Annie kept her temper. "I'll put up with anything as long as I can learn to read," she said to herself. Because Annie's eyes were so bad, she learned to read raised letters by feeling their shape. She would sit for hours without even changing positions. She read stories about princes and giants, and stories about great leaders of history, and stories about Bible heroes. "It's like a whole new world inside books," she thought to herself. "My dream has come true." That kind of raised lettering is called Braille. If you go to some of the restaurants in Spokane, even McDonald's, they have a Braille menu, and you can feel it with your hands because it's raised, the letters are raised, and it's a series of dots. It's very unusual, and I've tried it. I don't know how they do it, but I've never been that desperate. And when you're desperate, you can do a lot of things that you thought you never could do. And so that's the way Annie was. She was desperate. She wanted to read so badly. And so she did. Annie also learned to talk with a lady at Perkins who was blind and deaf. She spelled words by touching the lady's hand with her fingers. Not long before Annie finished school, something happened that she hadn't even dreamed about for a long time. A doctor decided to try an operation on her eyes. When the last strip of cloth was taken off, the doctor said, "Annie, can you see me?" Annie gasped. "I can see you. I can see the nurse and the bed and the window. And it's all so beautiful." She hugged the doctor. "I'm not blind anymore." What a lovely miracle. Because of the Lord's healing and the doctor's ability, Annie Sullivan didn't have to stay her whole life blind. But because she was once blind, she had a job to do. And that's what you're going to read. Not today, but tomorrow on Tuesday you'll read that, and you'll learn about the job that God had for Annie to do. And it's an amazing story. There's a movie called The Miracle Worker, and maybe you can check that out sometime at the library or Redbox or wherever you could find something like that. Stream it and watch The Miracle Worker. It's a pretty good movie, and you would enjoy that. So your assignment is to read 168 through the end of the chapter, but I'll write that down so you don't have to remember it. But what a lovely story. Good turns. I love it when stories end happily. You know, they go from really a bad situation to a good situation. And that's the way it is with Annie Sullivan. You'll hear about her all your life. Annie Sullivan and the job that she had to do. She's a very famous person in the world. At least at one time she was a very famous person. And so you will hear about her, and you'll read lots of stories about Annie Sullivan in your growing up. Okay, that's all for now. Bye-bye.